Undercover boss watches her smile, not knowing she'll be evicted next week. Monday morning. The weather was cold and gloomy, but the new Dawn Maplewood Corner still opened its doors at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Its soft yellow light casting a reassuring glow on the brown tile floor for anyone just emerging from a long night. Michael Foster chose the table by the glass window. Wind seeped through a crack in the old window frame, making him shiver slightly as it touched the collar of his shirt. He placed his notebook on the shiny wooden table and took out a pen, but didn't write anything yet. In front of him was a simple menu: toast, a poached egg, a cup of black coffee. But he hadn't come for breakfast. He had come to OBSERVE. Claire appeared at exactly 6:38. A white shirt under a cream-colored apron bearing the new Dawn logo. Her long hair was tied back neatly, the ends still damp. One of her shoelaces had come undone, but Claire paid it no mind. She walked quickly, holding an order pad and a personal water bottle, its silver color now faded. "Good morning," she said, a smile appearing as if by habit as she placed the coffee cup in front of him. Michael responded with a kind look and a quiet thank you. She turned away immediately, not lingering. But as Claire turned her back, Michael suddenly noticed something strange. Her water bottle was missing its cap. It was covered temporarily with a plastic grocery bag, tied with a rubber band, and the socks under her canvas shoes. They didn't match. No one would notice such small details, except for a CEO posing as a customer. Michael looked around. The cafe wasn't busy yet. A few customers were ordering from the touchscreen at the central counter. A middle-aged man picked up his phone and stepped outside, leaving his steaming coffee behind. Claire returned quickly, wiping down the other table. As she bent down, a small piece of paper fell from her apron pocket. Michael caught a glimpse of handwritten words in purple ink, smudged in one spot by water. Next month's rent, $1,220. Remaining $480. Deadline FRIDAY. Claire quickly picked up the paper, rolled it up, and stuffed it into her pocket. When she looked up, her eyes met his. For a brief second, Claire hesitated, as if caught hiding something she shouldn't let others see. But then she smiled again, a smile Michael would remember for a long time afterward. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" Michael shook his head, then asked a question in return.
His voice as soft as the wind.
"Do you live nearby?" Claire looked out the window where Maplewood Street was gradually getting busier. "Well, I used to. I used to live 2 blocks from here. But now probably not for much longer. They raised the rent again this month. I'm trying to find a new place, but nothing's certain yet." Michael nodded slightly. The answer seemed casual, but he knew. No one shares that they're about to lose their home with a stranger unless they have reached their breaking point. 3 more days, Claire added, her voice dropping as if speaking to herself. 3 days to find a place or get the money together. Michael didn't ask any more questions. He looked at the coffee in his hand, then back at the server who was walking quickly toward the counter, hiding a flurry of emotions behind a tensed nose and slightly trembling shoulders. Every word, every action, every pursing of her lips. It wasn't something that could be faked in a few seconds. They were molded by months of living through a struggle that NOONE noticed. A smile tempered by ANXIETY. A workday that began with the pressure of having to MOVE. A girl trying to keep everything together, while soon there would be NOTHING left to hold. Michael turned away, but his eyes still reflected the image of the server adjusting the menu on the touchscreen, where a customer was complaining because his toast didn't have enough cheese. Claire nodded, accepted the blame, and bowed lower than necessary. She didn't know the man watching her was the FOUNDER of the cafe where she worked. She knew even less that in just THREED, a why she would have to pack everything up, not because of any fault of her own, but simply because the rent was TOOHIGH. Maplewood Corner was once a modest residential area. A place where you could hear the sound of wheels rolling on brick paths each morning, where seniors brought newspapers out to their porches and children played in backyards. But that had changed. Over the past 3 years, a new wave had swept in. Young people in white shirts wearing wireless earbuds coming from the tech companies along the main road. They paid DOUBLA, the rent, and no one bargained. The price of a room climbed every quarter, like a race only the WEAALTH. Why were invited to run. And right at that intersection was a branch of the New Dawn chain, a cafe and bakery with a modern design, warm lighting, and walnut tables. Inside was the smell of butter cookies mixed with the sound of a coffee grinder, a scent that made anyone who entered feel at ease. Customers loved this place. They called it their SECONDHOME. But the server in the cafe, Claire, couldn't call it home in any sense of the word. Claire, 25 years old, brown eyes, slightly curly hair, a petite frame. She had a habit of greeting every customer by name, if she could remember it, or with a simple, "How are you today?" if she wasn't sure. Many mistook her for the manager because she was a LWOYS there. From 6:15 a.m. until after 3 p.m., 6 days a week. Michael watched her in silence. After many days of sitting at the same table, he had started to see things a THERS didn't. The thermal flask Claire always carried, something she held at her side like part of her uniform, was actually always EMPTY. It wasn't because she wasn't thirsty, but because she didn't have money in her pocket to buy anything to fill it with. One time he saw Claire standing in the staff room behind the counter. The door was only slightly ajar, and he happened to hear her rummaging through her bag. The rustling of a plastic bag, the light clatter of a plastic spoon. She broke a shattered cookie into THREE pieces, dividing them evenly onto 3 paper napkins. That was LUNCH. Another time, while Michael pretended to be choosing an item from the touchscreen, he overheard a short conversation between Claire and a new employee. "Have you eaten yet?" Claire smiled. "I just had some of the leftover baked cookies." "They let us eat here." Claire looked around before answering. "They do, but if the shift lead doesn't like it, it's better to bring your own food." Michael knew the company policy. New Dawn employees were allowed one light meal if they worked a shift over 5 hours. But at Maplewood, there were clearly other UNWRITT-ENRULAS. He began to suspect many things, not because someone had made a big mistake, but because everyone seemed to have gotten used to the abnormality. Claire was never late, but he noticed that one time she arrived with her hair still wet, her shoulders still damp with a few drops of water, as if she had just washed her face with cold water outside. She never ordered from the counter, nor did she ever sit in the break room. And strangest of all, she always kept a pair of flimsy flip-flops in her canvas bag, though she never wore them. Michael casually asked a few other employees. Still in his role as a curious customer, a young man named Kyle whispered while pouring water. "Claire's great, but I think something's going on with her. Lately, I've seen her sleeping on the bench out back before her shift." Sleeping at the cafe, Michael tried to keep his expression neutral. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual. The cafe wasn't open yet, but the lights in the back area were on. He stood on the sidewalk pretending to be on a call, his eyes looking through the small back window. And there, Claire was sitting alone. In her hand was a small notebook, its cover peeling. She flipped through the pages, her hand trembling slightly, then stopped on a page with a line in red ink. EVICTIONNOTICA. FINALDATEJULY12TH. She closed the notebook, tucked it into her thin jacket pocket, and stood up. Her expression changed in a single breath, from bewildered to composed, from desperate to professional. She opened the door to come out, just as Michael was entering through the main entrance. "Good morning," she said, with that same familiar smile. Michael nodded, but this time he couldn't pretend anymore, because the person who brought him coffee every morning had only FOURDAYS left before she had no home to return to. Wednesday morning. The Maplewood sky was covered in a pale layer of clouds, cold and dry, as if the entire neighborhood was holding a sigh it didn't dare release. Michael entered the New Dawn Cafe earlier than usual. The familiar table in the corner by the window was still empty. But this time he wasn't the first one there. Claire was already there. Not in her neat beige and brown uniform, not the busy server who always kept a smile on her face. Just a young woman. Her hair in a messy bun holding a steaming cup of coffee and a small notebook open wide on the wooden table. She was looking down, focused. Her right hand held a pen constantly crossing things out on a list she was in the middle of writing. Michael was about to turn away, to avoid making her feel awkward. But then his eyes accidentally caught a line of text written in red ink underlined TWICE. Landlord said, "Move out by FRID, a Y. Not enough for a deposit on a new place. Call Mom is staying with aunt temporarily. DONBOTHERHER. EFROZE. Just for a moment, but it was as if the entire room fell silent, and all the familiar sounds like the coffee grinder clinking spoons and orders being called out. Now completely DISAPPEARED from his ears. Michael turned his head away, continuing toward the counter as if nothing had happened. But his heart could not go back to how it was. He had seen the signs. The empty thermal flask, the crumbled cookies for lunch, the bloodshot eyes at the start of every morning shift. But those were just CRATCHES. Now he saw the CRACK, a piece of paper. Not complaining at all, not asking for help, just a note written hastily but cruelly. DONBOTHERMOM. That phrase Michael couldn't get out of his head. Because the person about to be evicted from her home was trying not to cause more trouble. In that moment, he thought back to all the times Claire served tables, offered a gentle smile, and asked customers more toast with the exact same tone, the same look, as if everything was FINA. But behind the scenes, she was crossing out lines in her notebook, as if tearing apart a dream of survival piece by piece. Michael sat at his table on the other side of the cafe. He didn't open his notebook, didn't order a drink, just silence. He used to believe that work would speak for itself, that if an employee did well, they would be rewarded. But he had forgotten one thing. The people who do well are often the ones who RARELY speak up about what they lack. And Claire, the person this whole neighborhood believed to be the CHERIEST server in Maplewood, was about to lose her home and still chose to come to work early as if everything was okay. A cappuccino was placed on Michael's table. "Here you are," Claire smiled faintly. "I tried a new recipe today, less milk, more foam. Hope you like it." Michael looked into her eyes that held the sunlight of winter. Then he nodded, trying to hide a sigh. "Thank you, Claire." She smiled, turned away, continued her work. But behind every step she took, Michael could hear the words from her notebook echoing silently. NOTENOUGHDEPOSIT FRIDAY DONBOTHERMOM. In his own notebook, the last blank page was opened. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote, "Someone who doesn't dare call their mother for help isn't lacking trust. They're just too used to shouldering it all alone." And he knew. It was time to do more than just take notes. Michael began to change his schedule. Instead of just sitting at his usual table in the morning, he came to the cafe at different times, quietly taking notes in his old notebook, each line feeling like it was torn from his own heart. On a Tuesday afternoon, he sat near the drink counter, where Claire often worked in silence. It wasn't because she wasn't good, but it seemed some INVISIBLA force kept her behind the counter where few people paid attention. A regular customer, dressed in a suit, walked in and placed a takeout order. While waiting, he turned and asked, You're Claire, right? I always love your service on Monday mornings. Very attentive. Claire smiled, but her eyes hesitated for a moment. Oh, I don't work Monday mornings anymore. Oh, what a shame, the man said, shaking his head. I've asked a few times, but it's always been a new employee. Michael wrote it down. Moved from the morning shift despite customer preference. That evening, he checked the shift schedule in the internal system. A clear pattern emerged. Claire hadn't been scheduled for ANY peak hours, early Monday mornings, weekends, or the lunch rush, for the past IXWEEKS. Meanwhile, a new employee who had only been there for 2 months was given priority for both SATURDAY and SUNDAY. Michael circled that line, then made another note. Shift scheduling does not reflect work performance. He continued to observe. After each customer, Claire would put the tips into a glass jar placed at the corner of the counter, as was the rule. But one day when the jar was full, the manager came out, took the jar inside, and no one knew if it was ever divided or not. And no one dared to ask. At the end of that day, Michael casually inquired, "Probably got some good tips today, huh?" Claire smiled, but her eyes couldn't hide a flicker of hesitation. Yes, the customers were very cheerful today. The answer had no numbers, only a sense of suppressed belief. Michael wrote again. Employee does not know the actual amount of tips received. Another day he noticed Claire was still wiping tables even though the clock showed it was 15 minutes past her shift. Reed walked by and said quietly, "Don't clock out yet. Finish up and then go home." Claire just nodded. Not a word of protest. The next day, Michael looked up her time card in the system. Claire's shift ended at 4:00 p.m. But he had checked the time yesterday. She left the caf closer to 4:20. There was no record of that extra work. He drew a red line. Works overtime, but is not compensated. The situation came to a head when Michael asked the administrative department to print the entire internal email chain related to requests for more hours, under the guise of a routine system audit. In the pile of files, he found an email from Claire, sent 3 weeks ago. "Dear Manager Reed, I would like to request to work 2 extra weekend shifts to increase my income as my rent is increasing by $300 next month. I am willing to do any work that is needed." Reed's response was just a single line. ENOTINTHEPERSONNELPLAN PERSONNELIAMITIUNSARENOTIALIDRSON. Michael read it again, twice, not because he didn't understand, but because he couldn't believe that the person who wrote that line was representing the very culture he had worked so hard to build. The next line in his notebook: ignores personal circumstances, lack of humanity and management. But the last straw came from a conversation he accidentally overheard. At the end of the lunch shift, 2 new employees were talking quietly in the storage area. "Claire is so nice, but I heard she got pushed off the good shifts because she won't play by the rules. What rules, covering for Reed when customers complain? Playing along. It's fine." Michael stood behind the door. FROZEN. A coffee shop. A place that served WARM breakfasts. Had turned into a place where, if you didn't be a WYURHEAD, you would be pushed out of the system. No one FIRED Claire. But every action. From the shift scheduling the tip, cutting the denial of extra hours, to the subtle hints, had gradually pushed her to the fringe without a single notice. Michael wrote the last line for that day. You don't need to use the word FIRAD if a person has to pack their things every night just to be able to keep working the next morning. That night, he didn't go back to his hotel right away. He sat alone at table number 6, the one Claire served most often. Looking out at the fogged-up glass window, in his heart, it was no longer anger. It was a painful question. How many more people are smiling just to hide a single truth? They can't afford to live in the same place they serve every day Thursday. 8:15 a.m. The busiest peak of the week. Early morning sun streamed through the large glass windows, reflecting off the light-colored wooden tables in the new dawn Maplewood Corner Cafe. The smell of toast and hot coffee mingled with lively conversations. Everything seemed to be running smoothly, but Michael was no longer sitting in his usual corner. He stood up, no longer as a customer. He walked slowly to the middle of the counter, his old rubber-soled shoes making a soft sound on the floor. But each step was heavy, as if he were carrying the weight of all the silence from those who had chosen to endure for too long. Reed, the manager, was saying something to a new employee, but stopped when he saw Michael approaching. His expression shifted from polite to wary, then to hesitant as he stopped right in the middle of the service counter. Michael placed his hand on the countertop. His voice was low but clear. "I just have one question." No one said anything. Why is the person who receives the BEST feedback from customers, the ONLY one who doesn't get enough hours to pay her rent? No one breathed heavily. Reed's shoulders slumped slightly. A moment of hesitation. I'm not sure who you're talking about." Michael didn't turn his head, but his eyes glanced to the left, where Claire was standing, her hands gripping a cleaning cloth, her back slightly hunched. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, but her throat moved slightly, as if swallowing a word she had long wanted to say. Reed stammered. I'm not directly responsible for my employees' housing situations," Michael cut him off. His voice calm but mercilessly sharp. "You are responsible for scheduling. You approve the tips. You decide who gets to live near where they serve. And who doesn't." A couple sitting near the door stopped eating. The woman put down her knife, her hand gently taking her husband's. In the kitchen, a male employee froze while placing bread on a plate. No one was smiling anymore. Michael slowly took off his old baseball cap and placed it on the counter. "Sorry for not introducing myself sooner." He looked directly at Reed, his voice not loud, but echoing in the space where the background music had just been turned off. "I'm Michael Foster, the founder of New Dawn." Reed stood frozen. Claire looked up. Her astonished eyes welled with tears. "And I have seen ENOUGH." It was no longer a question. It was a DECLARATION. Not to shock, but to END, a series of days where what was right was overlooked, where exhausted workers were treated as INVISIBLA. Michael turned to face the entire team. "I used to believe that if I just created a warm space, a standard procedure, then everything would be fine. But I forgot the most basic thing." His voice was slow, not trembling at all, but everyone felt it like a sharp blade cutting through the air. NO system can be called KIND if it leaves its own employees without a HOME to return to. A soft sigh was heard from the corner of the kitchen. Michael pointed toward Claire. "SHE is the reason customers come back. She is the person any restaurant would want to KEP. But here we are letting her consider leaving. Not for lack of ability, but for lack of FAIRNESS." He paused for a beat, then turned to Reed. "Do you know how much of the tips POOLAD for even distribution never actually made it back to the person who DESERVE? DEIT, Reed stammered. "I was just following the previous shift leader's rules." I didn't think. Michael cut him off again, this time with a gesture. He held up his notebook, his voice still low. "You don't need to think anymore." He looked toward the door where the light shone on the table where Claire used to sit for her breaks. A peaceful spot, but never peaceful enough for a decent meal. "I didn't start New Dawn for someone to serve coffee and then sleep in their car after work." He turned back to face the team. "I am going to fix that. RIGHTNOW." Everyone froze. A young female employee gently touched Claire's arm, as if to silently ask, "Is this real?" Claire said nothing. But for the first time in weeks, Her eyes were no longer avoiding contact. She looked directly at the man who had just stood up to say for her what should have been said a long time ago. Michael gave a slight nod. No promises. No encouragement needed. But in that nod, the entire CAF understood. Something was going to change. And this time it wouldn't go back to the way it was. He said nothing more, just placed his hand on the counter one last time, then stepped away from the center stage, as if he had never wanted to be there in the first place. He didn't head for the exit, but walked around to the kitchen area where a shift management screen was running. And it was as if everything was just beginning. Michael didn't leave right after that morning. He returned to the CAF with a technical team from the main office. No longer in disguise. No longer with a baseball cap. He walked in as himself. The atmosphere inside felt frozen. Reed, the branch manager, stood motionless as he saw Michael walk straight to the counter, pull out his ID card and say clearly, "I'm Michael Foster, the founder of New Dawn." No one spoke. A few customers stopped eating and looked up. An employee behind the counter stared with wide eyes. But the only person who didn't turn around was Claire. She was in the back, wiping down a baking tray as if still trying to finish her final shift. Michael nodded to the head of the IT department. They connected to the POS system and extracted the ENT/IRE history of transactions, shift assignments, and internal emails from the last 3 months. It took less than TEN minutes, and everything began to fall apart, right from the core data that Reed thought no one would ever touch. On the large screen displayed in the middle of the counter, 28 transactions with direct tip notes for Claire AMAZ ING service, but there were no corresponding records of that tip being distributed to Claire. Nearly 400 DOLARS had been cut CLAAN. Full shift schedule for 3 months. Claire was not ONCE, scheduled for an evening or weekend shift. This was despite her being the HIGHESTRATED employee by customers on the ordering app. An internal email from Reed to the management team. Give the extra hours to the ones who PLAYALONG. Let the always rights types like Claire fend for themselves. Michael frowned. His lips tightened slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "Are there any audio recordings a technician pressed play?" Reed's voice echoed from the previous week's team meeting. "She keeps hanging around the counter, but she can't afford rent in this neighborhood. No need to keep her. Just CUT her hours and that'll do it." All sound in the CAF seemed to stop. No more sizzling oil. No more cheerful laughter. Only Reed's voice. Cold, hard, and UNDENIABLA. Claire emerged from the back. She said nothing, just stood there still, holding the cleaning cloth as if she didn't know where to put it down. Michael looked directly into Reed's eyes. "You think this is how you maintain service quality? By getting rid of people who don't fit the neighborhood LANDSC? A PE Reed swallowed hard." He glanced around, looking for an ally and excuse. But no one was looking back at him anymore. Michael continued this time, turning to the entire team. "I built New Dawn because I believe breakfast is the start of KINDNASS. But a place like this cannot survive on SILA and CE. It cannot survive by sacrificing the lives of the very people who MAKEITRUN. Claire was still standing still, but this time her tears were falling. Not from FEAR, but because if INALL, why someone had SEEN. Michael walked closer to her. Not a word of comfort, not a gesture of pity. He just spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. You don't DESERVE to apologize for doing the right thing. The WRONG lies with those who made you feel that way. A very long silence. Then, a clicking sound was heard. The POS system was updating its data. The WITHELDTIPES column began to be clarified item by name, with specific amounts. Michael nodded to the head of HR. They pulled out Reed's suspension papers and signed them on the spot. Reed turned and left without a word. But the way he walked, hasty head bowed, said it all. As the glass door closed behind him, the afternoon sun slanted across the counter, landing right where Claire was standing. She looked at Michael. Once again she smiled. Not a smile to please. Not a strained smile, but a smile that was allowed to be REATHE. Michael turned to the tech team. Reboot the entire shift and tip distribution policy in the system. I want everything to be TRA and SPARENT. And starting today, whatever someone does will be recorded EXACTLY as it is. A young employee in the coffee-making area, someone whose name no one had ever asked, burst into tears. Michael didn't ask why. He knew those tears didn't belong to Claire alone. They belonged to a whole generation of employees who were too used to being cut back, staying silent and forcing a smile while their pockets were empty. But today, they didn't have to smile anymore. Today, they were HEARD. Reed left the cafe that morning without a single goodbye. No one needed to say anything more. The system had said it all. Michael sat back down at his usual table. The coffee had gone completely cold, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he picked up his old leather-bound notebook and wrote a single line. No one should have to trade their peace of mind, just to be allowed to serve. And from the central office of New Dawn, within just 48 hours, everything began to change. The entire system activated an internal audit. An email was sent to all senior staff. Begin a priority review at all branches with employees rated as not flexible enough. A transparent report on tips, shift assignments, and work hours must be submitted by 60 p.m. This FRID, a Y. No more private messages. No more handwritten schedules that could be changed at the last minute. Everything was moved to an OPEN system, where every employee had the right to access and confirm. But the thing that moved many people the most wasn't in an email. It was an electronic ticket. The next morning, Claire received a notification from the Maplewood Community Housing app. Apartment 302 Maplewood View District has been secured with a deposit and the first 2 months' rent. Guarantor MIC HAELFO STER. For the first time in months, she didn't have to text her friends to ask if she could borrow a sofa for the night. She couldn't believe it and called the building manager to confirm. And the person on the other end just asked, "You're Claire right then. Come get the keys tomorrow morning." Someone said you deserve a place to call HOME. The following morning, Michael returned to Maplewood Corner. He didn't announce his visit, nor did he sit in his usual corner table. He just stood quietly on the patio watching Claire walk down from her second-floor apartment in a cleaner uniform than usual, her hair still neatly braided, but her eyes no longer bloodshot from lack of sleep. She smiled at the security guard, gave a slight nod to an elderly resident in the complex, and pushed open the door of the New Dawn cafe like someone who is no longer AFRAID of being moved at any moment. Michael took out his notebook. The last page was blank. He wrote, "No one should be forced to leave the place they contribute to every day, just because they can't afford to rent a room nearby." Right at the corner of the cafe window, the place that had once witnessed Claire quietly wrapping her lunch in a napkin, Michael had a small plaque installed. No lights, no gold plating, just a simple oak board with rustic engraving. Every cup of coffee is not just an order. It is a moment to LISTEN to the life of the person who made it. Customers read it and nodded in agreement. But the employees, especially those who had been through it, stayed silent for longer. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. It wasn't for PR. It was a PROMISA. 3 weeks later, an internal newsletter was sent from Michael's office publicly announcing the new policy. Real-time tip distribution rule. Every transaction must clearly show who served, how much the customer tipped, and the system will automatically distribute and confirm via the app. Housing protection contract. Any employee who has worked at New Dawn for 6 months or more has the right to apply for housing assistance if their rent exceeds 40% of their after-tax income. Transparent shift coordination policy. All changes to shift assignments must be confirmed by both the employee and management with a traceable record for 90 days. Not everyone noticed the change right away. But for those who had slept in their cars, who had brought leftovers because they couldn't afford a new meal, they knew. It was REAL. Michael no longer needed a disguise. He came to the caf like a regular, sat by the window, ordered crispy toast and a black coffee, this time brought out by Claire herself. She placed the plate down, smiling as she always did. But this time, Michael saw the light in her eyes, no longer mixed with the shadow of uncertainty. "Anything else for you?" Claire asked. Michael shook his head, smiling. "Just that you don't leave this place anymore." She burst out laughing, the most genuine laugh he had ever heard from her, then turned away. Michael watched her go. Her shoulders were still thin, but they were no longer slumped.